after my dad passed away. My husband, looking excited, said, "Christina, now that your father is gone, we know you'll get a big inheritance. My parents and I already have plans for it." He said this right after I got back from my father's funeral. Without waiting, my mother-in-law added, "Sweetheart, I already paid for our trip to Italy. It's going to be amazing." As if that wasn't enough, my father-in-law smirked and said, "I just picked up my new BMW. It'll look great in the garage." For a moment, I was too shocked to speak. They were acting like my father's money belonged to them, but then I took a deep breath and said firmly, "You vultures, you won't get a single cent of my inheritance." They looked at me with shock and anger, as if I had ruined their dreams, but before they could say anything, I already had a plan. In the end, they were the ones begging for my forgiveness when I had the last laugh. But before I tell you everything, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on the notification bell. Hi, I'm Christina, and today I'm sharing a story that changed my life forever, a story of love, betrayal, and a twist of fate. It all started when I was a rebellious girl raised by an overprotective dad. After losing my mom at a young age, it was just the two of us against the world. My dad had strict rules: no late-night parties, no bad boyfriends, and always work hard. "Christina," he would say seriously, "you have to be strong because the world won't be kind to you." Back then, I would roll my eyes. I dyed my hair in crazy colors just to annoy him. I hung out with friends he didn't like. I did everything a rebellious teenager does. But one rule I never broke: keep my grades up and have a plan for the future. The only person who understood me was my Aunt Grace, my dad's younger sister. He saw the world in black and white, but she filled it with color. I always ran to her house after fights with my dad. "He's just afraid of losing you," she would say, handing me a cup of hot chocolate. "He lost your mom too soon, Christina. Fear makes people act in ways they don't mean to." I didn't realize then that her words about fear and loss would come back to me years later in a way I never expected. After high school, I got a scholarship to study accounting. Finally, I was free, or so I thought. That's when I met Jake, and like all love stories that turn into nightmares, ours started like a fairy tale. Jake was everything a girl could want: charming, smart, and with a smile that lit up the room. We met at a work event while we were both interns. "Casablanca," he said, quoting the famous movie. I replied with another quote from the film. It felt like we had known each other forever. "You're different from other girls," he told me that night, his eyes shining in a way that seemed romantic. Now I know it was something else: calculating. I fell hard for him. Jake seemed perfect, always surprising me with little gifts, remembering important dates, and getting along with my friends. But there were signs. Small things I should have noticed, like tiny cracks forming before something breaks. The signs started showing when we first began dating. Jake always forgot his wallet when we went out, but he made it seem cute. "Honey, can you pay for me? I'll make it up to you later," he'd say with his charming smile. We got married just 6 months after we met. The day before the wedding, my dad called me into his office. "Christina," he said seriously, "are you sure about this? There's something about Jake that worries me." "Dad, you always worry," I said, frustrated. He let out a deep sigh. "Just promise me one thing: keep your money separate from his, just in case." Of course, I ignored him. After all, Jake and I were soulmates. The first year of marriage was amazing: romantic dinners, lazy weekends, big dreams for the future. We lived near his parents, Karen and Robert, who seemed sweet at first. Karen always brought homemade desserts and gave advice I didn't ask for. Robert told jokes and made himself at home in our house. At the time, I thought it was nice. I was so naive. Everything changed when I got a promotion at work. Jake started acting strange, cold, distant. One night, as I got ready to go out with friends, he suddenly said, "Don't you think you're going out too much? A wife should spend more time at home." I stared at him. "Since when do you decide what I do?" He just shrugged, but his eyes were cold. "I'm just saying, people are talking." Later, I realized people meant his parents. Karen started coming over unannounced, leaving little notes about how messy the house was. Robert showed up every Saturday, taking over the living room with his loud sports shows. But the worst part? Jake wanted control of our money. "Love, you work so hard, let me handle our finances," he said, flashing that same smile that once made me melt, but now sent chills down my spine. Slowly, without realizing it, I lost control. Suddenly, I had to ask for permission to buy things while Jake spent money however he wanted. Even worse, his parents started draining my salary. Every month, there was a new emergency. Karen needed expensive dental work, Robert had debts that had to be paid. And I, the strong, rebellious girl I used to be, was disappearing. I was turning into someone I didn't recognize. But fate had a plan. The turning point came when my company took over a smaller firm. The accounting was a disaster, and I was the one who had to fix it. That meant extra hours, stress, and late nights at work. One night, I came home completely exhausted. Jake was on the couch, watching TV. The table was empty, no dinner. "Where's dinner?" he asked without even looking at me. "You know I'm always hungry after work." Something inside me snapped. "Jake, you've been unemployed for 3 months, why didn't you cook?" He laughed, a cold, heartless laugh. "Cooking? That's women's work, Christina. I'm not playing housewife. We agreed before getting married, there's no such thing as men's or women's jobs," I shot back. Jake slammed the door and stormed out. He disappeared for 3 days without a word. When he finally came back, he acted like nothing had happened. Around that time, I got a big promotion, assistant director of the finance department, with a huge salary increase. But instead of celebrating, Jake dropped a bombshell. "That's amazing, love, now I don't have to worry about finding a job, you make enough for both of us." Before I could even react, life threw another punch. My Aunt Grace called, her voice shaking. My father had passed away. Jake refused to come to the funeral. "I hate those things," he mumbled, turning over in bed. "You go handle it." At the lawyer's office, I was handed a mysterious folder. "Your father left strict instructions for you to receive this after his passing," the lawyer explained. Inside was a heartfelt letter about my inheritance, but there was also something strange, a business card from a private investigator and a short note. "Find Alex, don't trust Jake." Shocked and heartbroken, I kept it to myself. But after that, I started noticing strange things I'd ignored before. Jake never liked having his photo taken. His parents hesitated when I called them. Some of his stories about the past didn't add up. One day, I found an ID in his wallet with a different name. When I asked about it, he laughed it off, saying it was a printing mistake. Another time, I overheard Karen calling Robert by a different name when she thought she was alone. Following my father's note, I tracked down Alex, the private investigator. What he told me made my blood run cold. "Your father hired us 6 months ago," Alex said, opening a thick file. "He suspected your husband was hiding something. What we found is disturbing." On his desk were documents and photos that revealed a shocking truth. Jake wasn't Jake. His real name was Alex Hudson. He was wanted in 3 countries for fraud. His parents, Cecil and Grant, were professional criminals. They had a history of scamming wealthy women and stealing inheritances. "They target successful women or those about to receive a large inheritance," Alex continued. "Your father found out 2 weeks before he died. He was gathering the last pieces of evidence." I felt dizzy. "Why didn't he tell me?" I whispered. "He was going to," Alex said gently. "He had planned to tell you over dinner that night. The night he died." A chill ran down my spine. "Your father's car accident was very convenient," Alex said carefully. "We're looking into it." I knew what I had to do. That night, I put on an act worthy of the scammers they were. I opened an expensive bottle of wine, the kind they loved, and played along. "So, tell me about your plans for my inheritance," I said, pouring more wine and smiling sweetly. "Don't leave out any details." Their eyes sparkled with greed. "First, Italy," Karen exclaimed, waving a travel brochure. "I already booked the most luxurious villa on the Amalfi Coast. 3 months of pure paradise. And then Paris," Robert added. "I even picked out the Rolex I'm buying when we get there." Jake, more excited than ever, pulled out his laptop. "Look, love. I even made a spreadsheet, $1,000,000 for travel, $80,000 for the yacht I've always wanted." "A yacht?" I interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "I thought you were afraid of the water. You told me that yourself." He hesitated for a second. "Oh, right. Well, I got over that fear," he said quickly. "Of course you did." "Alex," I said, my voice turning cold. His smile faded. "What did you just call me?" Jake asked, his voice shaky. "Alex Hudson," I replied, opening a folder on the table. "Or do you prefer Anthony Carter? Matthew Silverstone? How many names have you used?" Karen jumped in, her voice as fake sweet as ever. "You seem very stressed, dear," she said, pouring more wine. "This morning, Robert and I were talking, and we thought maybe you should take a little break, a few months in a nice, quiet clinic to rest and clear your mind." I smirked. "Funny you mention that, Cecil. I actually found some very interesting papers about a clinic. But that's not all I found." Karen's hand shook. The wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Let's talk about my father's death, I continued, throwing a pile of photos onto the table. Isn't it strange that he died right when he found out who you really are? Jake, Alex, took a step closer, his face full of fake concern. Love, you're confused. You need help. You're imagining things. Am I? I asked, pressing play on my phone. Karen's voice filled the room. The old man knows everything. We have to act fast before he tells her. All the color drained from their faces. Robert, Grant, moved toward me aggressively. I wouldn't do that, I said calmly, pulling out an envelope. I already sent everything to the police. They should be here in 3, 2. Right on cue, sirens blared outside. Did you really think my father would leave me unprotected? I laughed as panic spread across their faces. He hired the best investigators in the country. We know everything, every scam, every stolen dollar, every lie. Jake tried to run, but the house was already surrounded. Within minutes, all three of them were in handcuffs. Christina! Jake yelled as they dragged him away. I really loved you. I tilted my head. No, Alex, I replied calmly. You loved my $250,000. Oh, and that plan to kill me after stealing the money? Terrible idea. His eyes widened as he realized, I knew everything. You have no proof, Alex spat, his usual charm gone. It's your word against ours. 3 respectable people against a woman blinded by grief. I smirked and held up my phone. Actually, I have plenty of proof, I said. Like your conversation 3 days ago, where you talked about drugging me and faking my suicide at that clinic. You thought a yacht accident would be too suspicious, right? Karen, Cecil, dropped the act completely. Her eyes turned ice cold. You should have stayed quiet, she hissed. Just like your father. You never know when to stop meddling. I clenched my jaw, but I stayed calm. Speaking of my father, I continued, my voice steady, did you really think you could cover up the sabotage of his car? The investigators found fingerprints. Grant, Robert, tensed but didn't move as the sirens grew louder. I leaned forward slightly and smirked. You know what's the saddest part? I poured myself the last glass of wine and smiled. You were so sure I was clueless, I said. You never even noticed that I spent the last month collecting proof. Every conversation recorded, every plan documented, every bank transfer tracked. Suddenly, the doors burst open as the police rushed in. Christina! Alex screamed as they cuffed him. I really loved you. I tossed the bank statements at him. No, you love this, I said. And since you love numbers so much, here's one, 25 years in prison. But don't worry, your trip won't be to Italy. It'll be to a federal cell. Cecil made one last desperate attempt. You won't survive without us. Who will take care of you? I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. My father always said I was too strong for my own good. I think he was right. As they were dragged away, I could hear Cecil crying about the lost villa, Grant swearing about his Rolex, and Alex, finally silent. That night, I sat alone in my house, opened a much better bottle of wine, and made a quiet toast to my father. Months passed. The trial was fast, there was too much evidence to argue against. It turned out that their happy family had left a path of destruction across Latin America, 7 women murdered, all following the same pattern: inheritance, marriage, accident. More survivors started coming forward. One of them, Zoe from Chile, reached out to me. You did what I was too scared to do, she told me. If you hadn't stopped them, they would have kept going. The sentencing was harsh. Alex got 30 years for fraud and premeditated murder. Cecil and Grant got 25 years each. No parole. No escape. On the last day of the trial, Alex made one last attempt. Christina, we can fix this. I've changed, I swear. I smiled. You were right about one thing, Alex, I did need therapy. To understand how I let myself be fooled for so long. But now? Now, I'm better than ever. With part of my inheritance, I created a foundation in my father's name, helping women escape financial fraud and abusive relationships. The rest? Well, let's just say I finally took that trip to Italy alone and free. Last week, I got a letter from prison. Alex was begging for forgiveness, claiming he had found God and changed. Attached was a request for money. I laughed so hard that coffee came out of my nose. That letter? It became confetti at my foundation's opening party. As I looked around at all the women, survivors like me, I realized something: sometimes we go through hell just to find out how strong we really are. When I look in the mirror now, I don't see that rebellious girl who used to challenge her dad just for fun. I see a woman who honored his legacy by protecting others from the nightmare I lived through. And that money they all wanted? It's doing exactly what it should, turning pain into power. As for love? Let's just say I check criminal records before the first date now. If you're watching this and something about my story feels familiar, remember, sometimes what seems like love is just a trap. But also remember this, you are stronger than you think. And Dad, wherever you are, thank you for watching over me, even when I didn't know I needed it.